My name is Leo. A little over 2 years ago, my ex-girlfriend, Chloe, punched me in the stomach on the side of a busy highway because I was 10 minutes late picking her up from a friend's house. I was still in my work uniform, a slightly wrinkled button-down and slacks, and the late afternoon sun was blinding, glinting off the endless river of cars around us. The air in the car was thick with a silence that had teeth. As I doubled over, the horn blaring against my chest, a desperate, wheezing sound escaped my lips. The pain was sharp, a white-hot bloom beneath my ribs, but it was the humiliation that truly stole my breath. I could see faces in the passing cars, blurs of curiosity and alarm. And in that moment, a ridiculously clear thought cut through the panic. This all started with a party dress. A dress she wanted me to take out a $1,500 personal loan for. A loan in my name because at 27 years old with over $5,000 in credit card debt and no job, no financial lender would touch her. I see the question you're probably asking. Why didn't I leave then? Why did I stay long enough to become a spectacle of violence on a freeway? To understand that, you have to understand that our relationship was never really a partnership. It was a debt of pity I felt I owed her, a debt I almost paid for with my life. We were together for 4 years, a long time when you start at 19. She was 23, and to me, she was worldly, magnetic. We met through mutual friends at a local concert, and I was immediately captivated. She had this intense way of listening, of making you feel like your words were the most important she'd ever heard. For a kid like me, that was everything. My home life was a constant storm of my parents fighting. It was loud, unpredictable, and emotionally barren. Chloe's small, quiet apartment became my sanctuary. The first year it truly was. We'd cook pasta, watch old movies, and talk for hours. I felt seen, cherished. But I was trading one kind of chaos for another. I just didn't know it yet. I was swapping the loud, overt dysfunction of my parents for Chloe's quiet, creeping version. I was so desperate for an escape that I didn't realize I wasn't running toward safety, but simply into a different kind of cage, one that was decorated to look like love. The shift was subtle. She lost her retail management job and just stopped looking. She claimed the stress was too much for her diagnosed clinical depression, ADHD, and autism. I, steeped in a desire to be the fixer I could never be at home, felt a profound duty to protect her. Her family had moved to another state a year before, a fact she presented not as a life change but as an act of cruel abandonment. "You're all I have, Leo," she would whisper, her eyes welling up with tears that always seemed to be just on the verge of spilling. It was the emotional equivalent of a checkmate. How could I walk away from that? So I didn't. I stepped up. Slowly, transaction by transaction, I stopped being her boyfriend and became her full-time carer. It began with small, seemingly innocuous requests. "Hey, can you grab some groceries on your way over? My disability payment is late, I'll get you back." She never did. Soon I was making weekly grocery runs for her, my cart filled with her specific brand of almond milk and gluten-free bread. Then it became essentials. I'd show up and there would be no toilet paper, no soap, no toothpaste. "I'm so sorry," she'd say, looking down at her hands, the picture of shame. I had to choose between paying my internet bill or buying essentials, and I need the internet to look for jobs. She was never looking for jobs. I was a junior graphic designer, barely making ends meet myself, but I had a steady paycheck. My stability became her slush fund. She claimed she could barely make rent, yet new, expensive objects would appear in her apartment like magic. A pristine, limited edition anime figurine. A stack of brand new, $70 video games. When I gently inquire, her answers were swift and dismissive. "It was on sale," she'd shrug. "I used my credit card, it's fine." But it wasn't fine. The $5,000 in debt she'd accrued wasn't from a medical emergency. It was a monument to her impulsivity. One evening I sat her down and tried to talk to her about it. I'd researched loan consolidation programs and nonprofit credit counselors. "Chloe, we could make a plan," I said softly. "We could tackle this together." Her face hardened instantly. "Why are you trying to control me? You sound just like my dad. I thought you loved me for who I am." The conversation was over. I had been framed as the villain for offering a solution. I retreated, feeling guilty for having upset her, for making her feel judged. I was buying her food, but she was buying toys. And I was letting it happen because the accusation of not loving her was a weapon I hadn't yet built a defense against. The request for the dress was the moment the fog should have burned away. It was for a lavish, exclusive Halloween party. The theme was Gothic masquerade, and Chloe had her heart set on a custom-made gown that would make her look like a vampire queen. The price tag was $1,500. She presented this to me on a Tuesday night while I was eating a sandwich after a long day at work. She had sketches on her tablet, her eyes gleaming with an excitement I hadn't seen in months. "So," she began, her tone casual as if she were asking me to pass the salt, "the designer is amazing, but she needs a deposit. I was thinking we could just get a small personal loan." I stopped chewing. "A loan? Chloe, your credit is shot. You can't get another loan." She didn't even look up from the screen. "No, silly, not under my name, under yours. Your credit is good." The air left the room. It was one thing to buy her groceries, to cover her utilities. That was helping. This was a formal, legally binding entanglement. It was asking me to go into debt for a costume. Then she delivered the line that would echo in my head for years. She finally looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes at my silence. "What? It's not a lot of money for you." That phrase, "for you," it was so dismissive, so utterly contemptuous of the sacrifices I was making. It reframed my support not as a kindness, but as an infinite resource she was entitled to. For the first time, the deep well of pity I held for her was poisoned by a surge of pure rage. But it didn't come out as a shout. It came out as a sob, tears I didn't know where they streamed down my face. "That is the most selfish, childish, and delusional thing you have ever asked of me," I choked out, the words raw and ragged. I told her she had completely lost touch with reality. I grabbed my keys and walked out, leaving her sitting there with her fantasy dress. It should have been the end. Looking back, that was the emergency exit, flashing brightly, and I was too afraid, too conditioned to run through it. 3 days of absolute silence followed. No calls, no texts. It was a terrifying, hollow peace. A part of me hoped she understood that this was finally it, but I didn't understand the playbook of a manipulator. The silence was a tactic. On the 4th day, the texts began. At first, they were accusatory. "I can't believe you'd abandon me like that. You're cruel." Then they shifted to guilt. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. I can't stop crying." Finally, she played her trump card, the lie. A long, rambling text explained that it was all her cousin's fault. Her cousin had been the one pushing her to ask, saying things like, "Leo would do anything for you, just ask him." Chloe painted herself as a victim of peer pressure, too fragile to say no. It was a lie so flimsy it was insulting, yet a desperate part of me wanted to believe it. I was 22, and my identity had become inextricably linked with being her savior. Without her to rescue, who was I? My own life, my own needs, felt blurry and undefined. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop, neutral ground. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she just sat there, crying softly into her hands. She said she was lost without me, that her disabilities made every single day a battle, and she just wanted one night to feel beautiful, to feel normal. She swore she didn't want the dress anymore. She just wanted me back. She dismantled my anger with her performance of suffering. And I, the fool who mistook a performance for genuine remorse, caved. I let her take my hand. We got back together, but something had been irrevocably broken. I had drawn a line, and even though I had allowed her to trample right back over it, I now knew exactly where it was. The anger I'd felt that night didn't vanish. It just went underground, dormant, waiting for the next earthquake. That reconciliation was a mirage. Within weeks, the old patterns returned, only this time they were darker, tinged with her resentment that I had dared to leave at all. I finally broke up with her again, this time with more resolve. The relief was staggering, a physical sensation, like a weight lifting from my chest, allowing me to breathe fully for the first time in years. My finances instantly improved. My mind felt sharp and clear. I started going to the gym. My friends, who had been walking on eggshells for years, celebrated. "Dude, it's about time," one of them said, clapping me on the back. She was a black hole. I took their advice and found a therapist, someone to help me unpack the complex knot of codependency and my ingrained need to fix people. I was, for the first time, thriving, and Chloe, from a distance, was not. Her life, which had been propped up entirely by my emotional and financial scaffolding, began to collapse. The calls started, always from a blocked number. She'd be sobbing in the midst of a full-blown panic attack. Her landlord was threatening eviction. Her family, still in another state, wasn't returning her calls. She would remind me that her former carer had quit during the pandemic and had never been replaced, leaving me as her only support system. Each call was a dagger of guilt. I had been her world. Had I just abandoned a disabled person to fend for themselves? My therapist issued a stark warning. Leo, this is a classic hoovering tactic. Abusers can sense when they're losing control and will create a crisis to pull you back in. But I was still so young, and I mistook her calculated desperation for a genuine cry for help. I was about to learn the difference between helping someone and being consumed by them. I got back together with her. Even saying it now fills me with a profound sense of shame. It was a conscious choice to walk back into a burning building. My excuse was my own family. A crisis had erupted at home, a bitter inheritance dispute that dredged up all the old traumas of my childhood. The shouting, the accusations, it was deafening. Chloe's specific brand of chaos felt in that moment more manageable. It was the devil I knew. I told myself it was a temporary measure. I would help her find a new carer, get her finances stabilized, and then establish ironclad boundaries. It was a beautiful, tidy lie I told myself to justify an act of profound self-betrayal. I was clinging to her dysfunction to escape my own, but the dynamic had soured completely. She knew I had come back out of weakness, and she despised me for it. Her dependence on me became absolute, but it was now laced with a palpable hatred. She needed me, and she could not forgive me for making her need me. My life was no longer my own. If I wasn't at my desk at work, I was expected to be with her. She demanded a minute-by-minute account of my day. My friends slowly faded away. The effort of scheduling a simple hangout and enduring the subsequent fight with Chloe was too exhausting. My world, once expanding, had shrunk to the four walls of her stuffy apartment, a space that smelled faintly of stale coffee and her expensive, unused art supplies. The silence was gone. Now it was filled with the low hum of her resentment. While I was working overtime, fielding passive-aggressive texts from her about when I'd be home, Chloe was busy building a new life, one that didn't include me. She was having an online affair with a woman from another state. I stumbled upon it by pure chance. I was using her laptop to look something up when a notification popped up on the screen. The name was unfamiliar. The message was not. It was intimate, filled with shared jokes and future plans. My curiosity, a cold, sickening thing, took over. I found their chat history. It was a novel of betrayal, stretching back weeks. She had been orchestrating a secret relationship, pouring all the energy she claimed she didn't have into charming someone new. The most devastating part wasn't the cheating itself. It was the stunning hypocrisy. The woman who claimed her ADHD and depression made it impossible for her to fill out a job application had somehow found the focus and executive function to manage a complex clandestine affair. The entire foundation of my pity, the belief in her learned helplessness, turned to dust. When I confronted her, phone in hand, she didn't even have the decency to lie. She admitted it. The other woman, however, was just enjoying the attention and had no interest in meeting up with a jobless deadbeat. But Chloe was convinced she could win her over. So when I gave her the ultimatum, me or this person you've never met, she didn't hesitate. She chose her. And just like that, after everything I had done for her, she broke up with me. She broke up with me, but she had no intention of setting me free. As I had predicted, the moment Chloe was single, the other woman vanished, ghosting her completely. Chloe's fantasy life imploded. She was left with nothing. But instead of accepting the consequences, she reasserted her control over me under a new guise: friendship. "Can't just throw away 4 years, Leo," she said, her voice laced with false maturity. "I still need you as a friend." Weakened, heartbroken, and utterly exhausted, I agreed. This was her masterstroke of manipulation. By demoting me to friend, she shed any expectation of reciprocity while retaining all the benefits of my support system. But this was a friendship with a terrifyingly one-sided contract. She laid out the rules explicitly. I was required to inform her of my whereabouts. If I planned to go out with friends, I had to tell her where and for how long, and dating was subject to her supreme oversight. "I need to know who you're seeing," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need to make sure she's a good person. I just worry about you." It was surveillance masquerading as concern. It was a way to ensure I never built a new life, that no one else could ever take my place as her primary source of attention and support. I was a free man living under house arrest, and my ex-girlfriend was my warden. My initial compliance with her rules was seen not as a kindness, but as weakness to be exploited. When I began to push back, to delay my responses to her incessant check-in texts, her mask of friendly concern would drop, revealing the rage beneath. Her sweetness curdled into something venomous. The psychological abuse I had become numb to began to manifest physically. The first time, it was a shove. We were arguing in her living room about my plans to see a movie with a friend. She was screaming, accusing me of prioritizing others over her. As I turned to leave, she shoved me hard between the shoulder blades. I stumbled, catching myself on the doorframe, more shocked than hurt. The second time, it was a book, a heavy hardcover art book. She threw it at my head during another argument. I ducked just in time, and it slammed against the wall behind me, leaving a deep gash in the drywall. Each time, the violence was followed by a storm of tears and self-loathing. "I'm so sorry," she would sob. "I can't control it. My depression makes me so angry. You push my buttons." And the caretaker in me, the part of my brain she had so carefully conditioned over 4 years, would feel a flicker of that old pity. I was mistaking her abuse for a symptom of her illness, a dangerous confusion that kept me trapped. I was the frog in the pot of water, and the temperature was rising degree by agonizing degree. I had lost the ability to recognize that the heat was becoming unsurvivable. The highway was the moment the water boiled over. I was picking her up from a friend's house after work. A last-minute project had kept me at the office, and I texted her a quick apologetic message. "So sorry, running about 10 minutes late." A normal person would have replied, "Okay, no worries." Chloe's response was a single chilling word: unbelievable. When I pulled up to the curb, she wrenched the passenger door open and threw herself into the seat, slamming the door so hard the car shook. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was thick with her fury. I tried to explain, my voice sounding weak even to my own ears. "There was a major deadline, Chloe. I couldn't just leave." She cut me off by turning her head to stare out the window, dismissing my existence entirely. We hit rush hour traffic on the I-5 overpass, a concrete river of red taillights. She finally turned to me, her face a mask of cold, controlled fury. Her eyes were flat like a shark. "You have no respect for me," she said, her voice dangerously low. "You think your time is more important than my time." Before I could even process the words, she lunged across the center console. Her fist was a tight, white-knuckled ball, and it slammed into my stomach just below my sternum. The air exploded out of my lungs in a strangled gasp. The pain was sharp, sickening, and immediate. I doubled over the steering wheel, my forehead pressing against the horn, which let out a long, pathetic blare into the cacophony of the freeway. Through the blur of pain and tears, I saw them. The other drivers, their faces turning toward the sound, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. And in that moment of searing, public humiliation, I finally saw her. Not as a victim, not as a fragile person struggling with illness. I saw a monster. A cruel, entitled abuser who felt so righteous in her anger that she would assault me in broad daylight, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, simply because I was late. The pity was gone. It had been burned out of me. All that remained was a cold, clarifying fear. The rest of the drive to her apartment was conducted in a ringing silence, punctuated only by my shallow, painful breaths. My stomach was a knot of fire. My mind, however, was eerily calm, replaying the assault on a loop like a piece of security footage. The lunge, the impact, the blare of the horn, the faces in the windows. Each replay solidified a decision that had been years in the making. When I pulled up to her building, I put the car in park but made no move to get out. She glanced at me, her face still a mask of indignation, clearly expecting me to follow her inside and begin the all-too-familiar cycle of her rage followed by my apology for provoking it. "Get out," I said. The words came out as a ragged whisper. "What did you just say to me?" she snapped, her voice dripping with disbelief. I turned my head and looked at her, really looked at her for the first time without the filter of pity. I felt nothing. No love, no anger, no guilt. Just a vast, cold emptiness. "Get out of my car," I repeated, and this time my voice was steady, hard as steel. The change in my demeanor registered on her face. Her anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. The script had changed and she didn't know her lines. The tears started to well in her eyes, her go-to weapon. "Leo, baby, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I cut her off. "I don't care. Get out." She stared at me for a moment longer, searching for the man she could manipulate, the boy she could break. He was gone. She finally fumbled with the door handle and stumbled out onto the sidewalk. I didn't wait for her to close the door. I shifted into drive and pressed the accelerator, leaving her standing there, a shrinking figure in my rearview mirror. I drove straight home, locked my door and slid to the floor, my body finally succumbing to the violent shakes I'd been holding back. It was over. It had to be. The assault on the highway was the end of the relationship, but it was the beginning of the terror. She did not accept that it was over. The calls and texts were a relentless barrage, a digital siege. I blocked her number, so she began calling from private numbers, from burner phone apps, from the phones of mutual acquaintances she'd manipulated into helping her. The messages were a chaotic storm of emotional whiplash. One minute it was a string of tearful voicemails, begging me to come back, claiming she couldn't live without me. The next, it was a series of venomous texts promising to ruin my life, to tell my boss I was a drug addict, to destroy everything I cared about. I lived in a constant state of high alert. Every buzz of my phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. The final, unforgivable line was crossed late one night, about a week after I'd left. A private number flashed on my screen and I, in a moment of utter exhaustion, answered it. Her voice was low and slurred, thick with a malice that chilled me to the bone. "You really think you can just leave me?" she hissed. "You think you can just throw me away like I'm nothing?" And then she delivered the threat, her words calm and deliberate, each one a perfectly aimed dagger. "I am going to kill your family. I'm going to make you watch me do it. And then when you have nothing and no one left, I'll kill myself so I don't have to go to jail for it. I will leave you completely and utterly alone in this world, just like you've left me." The sheer, calculated cruelty of it, the psychopathic detail. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a promise. That was the moment I finally understood. I was not dealing with a heartbroken ex. I was dealing with a predator. My safety, and the safety of my family, depended on my complete and total disappearance from her life. The death threat was the final, brutal gift she gave me. It severed the last lingering strand of guilt I felt. The next morning, I moved with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My first stop was the police station. I sat under the fluorescent lights and filed a formal report, my voice steady as I recounted everything. The years of financial control, the physical assault on the highway, and the detailed threat against my family. It felt surreal, laying the ugly truth of my life out on a sterile form, but it was also the first step in taking back my own story. It was now a matter of public record. Next, I went to my phone provider and changed my number. I methodically went through every social media platform, deleting and blocking her and any friend associated with her. I scheduled a meeting with my boss and the head of HR. I told them everything, not for pity, but for protection. "I don't believe she'll act on it," I said, "but I need you to be aware. She is not to be allowed in this building." They were incredible, immediately implementing a security protocol. The hardest step was telling my family. Admitting the depth of the abuse I had endured felt like a personal failure, but their reaction was not judgment. It was a fierce, protective anger on my behalf. My friends, the ones she had worked so hard to isolate me from, became my lifeline. They helped me find a new apartment in a neighborhood she didn't know, helped me pack my things, and screened my old phone for any last desperate messages. We built a fortress of support around me, brick by brick, phone call by phone call, until the world she had shrunk to the size of her apartment expanded once more, and I finally felt safe. In the quiet safety of my new life, and with the guidance of my therapist, I began the painful but necessary work of dissecting the previous 4 years. I needed to understand the mechanics of the trap I had fallen into. It wasn't enough to just label Chloe as evil. I had to understand my own vulnerabilities that she had so masterfully exploited. My therapist introduced me to concepts that gave a name to the chaos: weaponized incompetence, codependency, trauma bonding. Chloe's helplessness was a strategy. By constantly professing herself incapable of working, of budgeting, of even basic household chores, she forced me into the role of the hypercompetent caretaker. My rescuer complex, born from my chaotic childhood, made me a perfect target. Her very real diagnoses of autism, ADHD, and depression became her ultimate tools. They were not just conditions she lived with. They were a shield she used to deflect any accountability and a sword she used to cut me down whenever I demanded more from her. How can you expect me to clean the apartment, look for a job/control my anger when you know how much I'm struggling? It was a checkmate every time. I learned that our relationship wasn't codependent in the classic sense. It was parasitic. I was the host. She was draining my financial resources, my emotional energy, and my precious time to sustain her own life, while actively preventing me from having a life of my own. And the most twisted part of all was that she despised me for the very dependence she had manufactured. She needed my stability, but she hated that my competence was a constant mirror to her own self-imposed failure. What does revenge look like after escaping that kind of psychological warfare? It's not the dramatic confrontation you see in movies. It's not about ruining their life the way they tried to ruin yours. True revenge is quiet. It's waking up in the morning and the first thing you feel isn't dread. It's brewing a cup of coffee in your own kitchen, in an apartment that is a sanctuary, not a cage, and drinking it in absolute silence. It's getting a promotion at work because your mind is finally free to focus on your own goals. It's laughing with friends, a deep, genuine laugh without the fear of having to answer a string of accusatory texts afterward. The police report never resulted in charges. Without witnesses to the threats, it was my word against hers. But it served its purpose. She knew there was a record. The harassment sputtered out and eventually stopped. A mutual acquaintance told me she had moved back in with her parents in another state. In the end, after all her threats, she was the one who blocked me. It was her final, pathetic attempt to have the last word, to frame my escape as her rejection. I let her have it. My revenge was peace. My revenge was rebuilding the life she had tried to dismantle. She had promised to leave me utterly alone in the world. Instead, I had finally found myself. And he was someone I was quite happy to be alone with. It's been over a year since I've had any contact with Chloe. The healing process is not linear. For months, I'd have nightmares, vivid replays of the fight on the highway or her voice on the phone making that threat. There were days of crushing self-recrimination, where I'd meticulously list every red flag I ignored, every boundary I failed to set. But my therapist taught me to reframe that blame as understanding. I was a 19-year-old kid when I met her, a kid who was already conditioned to accept chaos as normal. I did the best I could until I learned to do better. My friends, in their infinite wisdom, found a way to help me reclaim the narrative. When I share a particularly insane story from that time, they call it lore dropping. It transforms the trauma into a story. Something I am the narrator of, not the victim. The Leo who measured his worth by how much he could endure for someone else is a stranger to me now. My definition of strength has been completely rewritten. It's not about being someone's rock. It's about being your own foundation. It's the quiet power of saying no and not feeling the need to justify it. It's the wisdom to recognize that you cannot set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when they are the one handing you the matches. I found a new, chosen family in my friends, people whose love is a safe harbor, not a turbulent sea. No one emerges from a war zone without scars. I am more guarded now, slower to trust my own judgment in people. When I meet someone new, There's a part of my brain that is subconsciously running a diagnostic, scanning for the subtle tells of manipulation I am now intimately familiar with. But these scars are not a sign of damage. They are a testament to survival. They are the map of where I've been, and they ensure I never make the mistake of taking that path again. The most profound lesson Chloe taught me was the dangerous duality of pity. Pity can be a bridge to empathy, but without the guardrails of boundaries, it becomes a path to self-annihilation. I pitied Chloe so profoundly that I made her problems my identity. I took responsibility for her happiness, her stability, her very survival, and in doing so, I abdicated all responsibility for my own. I finally learned the critical distinction that my therapist repeated week after week. Someone's mental illness might be a reason for their behavior, but it is never an excuse for their abuse. Understanding her pain was compassionate. Allowing her to use that pain as a weapon against me was self-destructive. That distinction is the bedrock of my new life. Life today is calm. It's a beautiful, boring, wonderful calm. I was promoted to senior designer 6 months ago. The financial stability I once saw as a resource to be siphoned off is now something I am using to build my own future. I'm saving, investing, planning. I even started dating again. It was terrifying at first, but I met someone. Her name is Clara. It's new and we're taking it slow, but it feels healthy. The other night we had a minor disagreement about where to go for dinner. It was a silly, low-stakes thing. But in the middle of it, I had a moment of profound clarity. She stated her opinion, I stated mine. We talked about it for 3 minutes, compromised, and moved on. There was no screaming, no crying, no accusations of disrespect, no historical grievances brought up. It was just a conversation, a normal, healthy interaction, and it felt like a miracle. The stark contrast between that simple, respectful exchange and the volatile, manipulative minefield of my life with Chloe is a constant, humbling reminder of how far I've come. I am not her rescuer. I am not her caretaker. I am her partner, and it is the most liberating feeling in the world. I needed to tell this story, to put it all out there, not for sympathy, but as a message in a bottle for anyone who might be adrift in a similar storm. If you see yourself in my story, if you are the one constantly making excuses, paying the bills, managing the chaos, absorbing the rage, please know that you are not alone. I know how the lines get blurry, how you can become so accustomed to the dysfunction that it starts to feel like a twisted kind of normal. But it is not normal. Your peace is not a commodity to be traded for someone else's comfort. Your future is not collateral damage for their inability to build their own. Setting a boundary with someone you love or once loved can feel like an act of cruelty. It is the hardest, most painful thing you may ever have to do. But it is not cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It is choosing to save the one person you have the power to save, yourself. The punch to my stomach on that highway was the violent, brutal wake-up call I needed. I hope yours comes more gently. Thank you for listening.